Hi everyone, Career-thany boy Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Big K.R.I.T album, K.R.I.T is Here. This is the newest full-length album from songwriter, rapper, singer, producer, Mr. Big K.R.I.T. He is a Mississippi native, and over the past decade he has proven himself to be one of the most talented and consistent voices out of the South. And I feel like he's moving into this next project with an acknowledgement of the progression that he's made over the past 10 years or so, with the title of this album being K.R.I.T is Here, as opposed to the title of the breakout mixtape that put him on the map originally, K.R.I.T was Here. To me, that says an artist is attempting to make a career-defining statement. I went into this project hoping for that. I would love K.R.I.T to end this decade off on a very strong note, especially considering some of the low points in his discography that brought him to this point, where his attempts at a mainstream crossover didn't quite pan out. Even with the full force of Def Jam Records behind his work, with Live from the Underground, Cadillactica. In 2017, K.R.I.T dropped what was arguably his best album so far, an ambitious double LP of songs that were his grandest and most dynamic yet. So I'm curious to hear where he would go from this album, especially since the teaser tracks to this new record I didn't really find to be all that exciting. It mostly sounded like K.R.I.T was going to make yet another commercial run with a couple of songs that were just bland as hell and didn't really showcase what made him significant as an artist. The song K.R.I.T Here, the intro of the record, is a pretty amped startup to the album, with its very excited rapping, with its chipmunked soul samples, with its pummeling beat, but the skittering hi-hats and steady synth bass as well as the forgettable hook leave a lot to be desired. And then we have the song Addiction featuring Saweetie as well as Lil Wayne, and I imagine it's a pretty huge moment for K.R.I.T to get a Wayne feature on a record, but I mean, this track is about as formulaic or as by the numbers as modern pop rap gets. Gotta say, there are a couple other tracks on this album that were actually previewed before the release of this record on the EPs that K.R.I.T had released in 2018. The songs Energy and Live from Texas in that EP series, yeah, they're on this record, which is a little surprising to me because generally on those EPs that he dropped, those 3 EPs he put out in 2018, I found the material on them to be very basic, very plain, not as layered, not as dynamic, not as interesting, not as topical as a lot of the stuff that he has been releasing previous to that. So I thought that they were just leftovers and we weren't going to hear from those songs ever again, and yet they are appearing on this new record. It's not like these tracks take up too much real estate on the overall album though, because like usual, K.R.I.T does hand fans a lot of material. There are 19 tracks on this thing, 19. But the number of songs on this thing overall, and the number of songs I came into this thing already familiar with, are not the prime issues I have with this record. Really what makes me upset about this album, and I am not enjoying it, is just how bland it is. And not only am I getting this from the rapping, but from the songwriting and the instrumentals as well. And you can usually count on the instrumentals on a K.R.I.T record to be fantastic, even if he's not the one producing them. But God, are the beats on this thing glossy, average, smooth to the point of being forgettable, like on the tracks Obvious, Every Time, the J. Cole featured cut on here as well. I mean, I guess a lot of the material on this thing blends into the current trend of very sanitized, very inoffensive trap that you find getting a lot of hits in numerous corners of the internet, the kind of stuff you can see populating one Spotify playlist after another, but that sound and that style doesn't really play to K.R.I.T's strengths. It just seems like he's doing everything he can to not make this album stand out. The verses are forgettable, the hooks don't really pop, the features are boring as hell. Some of his weakest bars to date land on this thing too. Family matters more to me than the Winslow, Dark Night, no joke, I'm just hanging out the window. There are even some spots here where it feels like K.R.I.T is not really putting his all in as well. Back to the track Family Matters. The structure of the song is so weak, it's so repetitive. K.R.I.T didn't really flesh this one out at all. Not only that, but the beat sounds like it was just assembled out of random junk from a drawer, thrown into a blender and chopped up in a really jerky, sporadic way. The song Blue Flame Ballet. This is a joke, right? Is this a joke? Is this song a joke? It's got this god-awful fusion of old school synth funk, but modern hip hop going on in the instrumental. The person singing on the hook is not very good at all. This track sounds like if Dame Funk were trying to make fun of himself. Like this is what Dame Funk would produce to make a parody of Dame Funk. The only singing on this LP that's almost as bad as this is the weird washed out riffing on the track High Beams. You can barely make out a lot of it because it's so soaked in reverb. Then there's Outer Space, which is a bit of a surprise because K.R.I.T really comes forward with these expressions, these desires of space travel. I guess he's felt strongly about this for a while. It seems like a cool bit of escapism, but it's not really all that captivating of a tune. We have a surprise jazzy closer for the finishing track as well. I do like the slinky upright bass. I like the rhythm on this track, but I feel like this moment would be more appropriate if the ride up until this point had been more engaging, more fun, more exciting. A slightly out of character cool down moment like this would have been great. It would have been a cool way to tie up the album, but with the record being so underwhelming all the way up to here, it just leaves me really unfulfilled. I'm not really sure what to say about this record other than all of that. It's just a very mediocre LP from K.R.I.T. I just don't get why he pivoted the way that he did on this album. A few verses and topics on this thing did stand out for sure, but generally the beats didn't really go as hard as they typically do on a K.R.I.T album. They didn't really bring his trademark sound. There was very little in the way of a celebration of the tradition of Southern hip-hop on this record. And not that K.R.I.T needs to stay in the past to make good music, but he's always been so great at taking that sound and modernizing it a little bit so that it feels current, feels fresh, feels interesting. Ironically, some of the best tracks on this thing were the teasers and the songs that landed on those previously released EPs. I thought the deep cuts would actually provide a bit more promise, but in fact they didn't. They maybe disappointed the most. Yeah, sadly I'm not into this LP. I think it's K.R.I.T's most disappointing yet. And that's it. I'm feeling a decent 2 strong 4 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Big K.R.I.T. K.R.I.T is here forever.